This case, it never left me. Even after all these years, I can close my eyes and I'm right back there in Atlanta, 1979. The city was alive with music, with soul, with the kind of energy you could feel in your bones. But beneath that rhythm, there was something darker lurking, something none of us were prepared to face. It started like so many cases do, with a phone call. I remember the sound of the dispatcher's voice over the radio, flat but urgent. Unit requested, South River area, report of a body discovered. Calls like that, they freeze you. You take a breath, you look at the guys around you, and you just know someone's life is ended. And it's your job to walk into that moment, to be the one who sees it first. I drove out to the river early that morning. The sky was pale, the sun barely breaking over the horizon. Atlanta mornings can be cold, sharper than you expect, the kind of cold that cuts through your jacket and sits in your chest. As I got closer, I could already see the yellow tape fluttering in the wind, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the still surface of the water.
A jogger had found the body. Just a man out for his morning run, trying to start his day right, when he stumbled onto something no one should ever have to see. He stood off to the side, arms wrapped around himself, rocking slightly as though trying to shake the memory. His eyes, they had that look I've seen 100 times before. Shock, guilt, even though he wasn't guilty of anything. He just happened to be the unlucky soul who found the boy. The boy's name was Edward Hope Smith, 14 years old. He lay there by the riverbank, his small frame oddly still, clothes damp, skin pale. He could have been anyone's son. And in that moment, as I crouched beside him, I couldn't stop thinking about how young he was, 14. What kind of world does this to a child? We started the routine, photographs, measurements, bagging evidence, but beneath the motions, there was a tension we all felt. Something about it was wrong, too deliberate. This didn't look like an accident. This was intentional. And before we could even begin to make sense of it, another call came in. Another boy, Alfred Evans, also 14, also gone. 2 boys in less than a week, both found lifeless. That's when my gut told me what none of us wanted to admit. This was no coincidence. Someone was hunting children in Atlanta.
The city back then was already balancing on a knife's edge. We were proud of our progress. Atlanta was the city too busy to hate, or so we like to say. But poverty still haunted our neighborhoods. Drugs and crime had started to seep into the streets. And race, well, race was the silent weight pressing down on everything. Most of the children going missing were black, and in communities that already didn't trust the police, that fact made every conversation heavier, every glare sharper. I'll never forget one night, early on, standing on a porch in one of the neighborhoods. A mother clutched a photo of her son, tears streaking her cheeks, and she grabbed my arm with such force I thought she might leave a bruise. She whispered, her voice breaking, "Please, don't let my baby be next." What could I say? That we'd protect them? That we had it under control? The truth was, we didn't. We were chasing shadows, and the shadows were always a step ahead. Posters started going up around the city. Telephone poles plastered with smiling school photos of missing boys and girls. Each one seemed to stay up longer than the last. At first, we'd take one down when a child was found, out of respect. But as the weeks dragged on, too many posters stayed, curling at the edges, fading in the sun. It was like the city itself was becoming a graveyard of faces.
I can still see the press conferences, microphones jammed in our faces, reporters demanding answers we didn't have. "Is there a serial killer in Atlanta?" they asked.
We tried to calm the public, tried to say we were following every lead. But the truth was, we were drowning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Edward, I saw Alfred, I saw the next boy we found, and the next. Their faces stacked one on top of another until they were all I dreamed about. And each time we got that call that another child was missing, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Atlanta was supposed to be a city of growth, of progress. But that summer, it became a city of fear. Parents held their children tighter. Curfews were set. Kids stopped playing outside. The streets grew quiet, and in that silence, you could feel the dread. Looking back, I think we all knew then, deep down, that this was going to define us. That this wasn't just a series of crimes. It was a nightmare that would haunt an entire generation. And for me, it became the case I would never escape.
The weeks that followed those first discoveries were some of the hardest of my career. Atlanta wasn't just unsettled anymore. It was terrified. You could feel it in every conversation, in the way people looked at one another, suspicious, guarded. Parents wouldn't let their kids walk alone, not even to the corner store. Churches held vigils almost nightly. And everywhere you turned, the same question hung in the air. Who is taking our children? Inside the department, the pressure was suffocating. My desk was buried under files, each one stamped with names, faces, dates. Edward, Alfred. And soon after it was Milton, Yusuf, Angel. So many names, too many. Each case started the same, a missing persons report, a family desperate for answers, and then days later, the worst news possible. I remember walking into one family's living room, the Jacksons. Their boy, Jimmy, had been gone for 3 days. His mother sat on the couch, clutching one of his school notebooks, rocking back and forth as if she could will him back into the room. His father stood by the window, jaw tight, eyes locked on us like we were supposed to have the solution. But we didn't. All we had were questions.
The hardest part of those meetings wasn't the anger, though there was plenty of that. It was the hope. Parents would search our faces, looking for some sign, some tiny hint that their child was still alive. And when we couldn't give it, when we had to leave with only a promise to do everything we could, I felt like I was failing them right there in their own homes. The city demanded answers. The mayor, the press, the community leaders. Everyone wanted results yesterday. We doubled shifts. We set up task forces. We ran down every lead. We interviewed hundreds of people. But the killer, whoever he was, stayed just out of reach. I still remember a night when I drove through one of the neighborhoods hit hardest by the disappearances. Streetlights flickered dimly. Kids' bicycles sat abandoned in yards, and silence hung heavy. Normally, Atlanta was a city alive with sound, music, kids playing, cars buzzing by. But not that night. That night, it was as if the whole city was holding its breath. I pulled over near a park and just sat there in the car, headlights off, watching the empty swing sway gently in the breeze. And I thought, what kind of person does this? What kind of monster takes children from a community already fighting so hard to survive?
Rumors started to spread. Some people believed it was the Klan carrying out some twisted campaign of terror. Others thought it was a lone madman. Some whispered about trafficking rings, about satanic cults. theories that grew wilder the more desperate people became. And in the middle of all that chaos, we were the ones expected to cut through the noise and find the truth. But the truth wasn't coming easy. Evidence was scarce. Most of the children were last seen walking home from school, or heading to a store, or simply vanishing between one block and the next. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no weapon. Just children gone, and then bodies found days, weeks later, often near rivers or wooded areas. Whoever was doing this knew the city, knew how to move through it unseen. And then there were the press conferences, standing there under those bright lights, cameras clicking, reporters barking questions. I often felt like I was in the middle of a storm. Is it true the killer is targeting only black children? How many victims are connected? Why hasn't there been an arrest? Every question was like a bullet, and no matter how carefully we answered, the truth was obvious. We didn't have control.
At night, I'd go home and sit in the dark, the case file spread out across my kitchen table. My wife would beg me to get some sleep, to let it go for a few hours, but how could I? How could I close my eyes knowing another child might not live to see the morning? The city wasn't just afraid, it was angry. Community leaders started demanding more from us, accusing the department of not caring because the victims were poor, black, and from neighborhoods that had always been ignored. I wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that we cared deeply, that I cared. But in the end, words don't matter. Results do. And we didn't have any. The funerals became unbearable. One after another, tiny coffins lowered into the ground, mothers wailing, fathers standing stone-faced, as though the only thing keeping them upright was sheer will. I stood at the back during one service, hat in my hands, and I remember thinking, I've been a cop for years. I've seen murder, I've seen blood, but I've never seen this much grief, all at once. By the end of 1979, the body count had risen to levels no one wanted to say out loud. And still, no suspect, no arrests, no peace. Atlanta was drowning in fear. And I was drowning in guilt. Because every time another child disappeared, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, if I'd worked harder, thought faster, pushed further, maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I could have saved them. But the truth was, the nightmare was only just beginning.
By the time 1980 rolled in, the city had changed. Atlanta wasn't the same place I'd grown up in. And it sure as hell wasn't the city I'd sworn to protect when I pinned that badge on my chest. Fear had seeped into every corner, every street, every conversation. More children vanished. Names and faces blurred together in my mind. Yusuf, Milton, Latonia, Aaron, each one unique, each one loved. But in the files stacked high on my desk, they became numbers, dates, locations. That was the cruelest part of it all. The humanity getting buried under paperwork. I fought it, tried to remember each child's smile, each parent's plea. But when you're staring at 20, 30 cases, it becomes overwhelming. We set up a special task force, pulling detectives from every unit, working around the clock. Our command center was a converted office space, its walls plastered with maps of Atlanta, push pins marking the places where children had last been seen, red circles where bodies were found. From a distance, the board looked like some grotesque constellation, a pattern of suffering stretching across the city. I'd stand in front of that map for hours, tracing lines with my finger, hoping some clue would reveal itself. But the dots never lined up neatly. The killer wasn't following a simple path. He was smart, unpredictable, and he knew how to vanish.
And then there was the press. The press. Every day, they hounded us, demanding answers. Their cameras followed us to crime scenes. Their headlines screamed panic. Atlanta under siege. Children hunted in the streets. The coverage made people even more terrified. But worse, it made parents desperate. I lost count of how many times we got calls from folks convinced they'd spotted the killer, or that they had evidence, or that their neighbor was acting suspicious. We investigated everything, but most led nowhere. And every false lead meant time wasted while the real killer kept moving. Community leaders, preachers, activists, they started pointing fingers. Some said the police weren't doing enough because the victims were poor and black. Others claimed we were covering something up. Standing in uniform at neighborhood meetings, I felt the weight of every eye on me. Anger, distrust. Some shouted, some cried. And as much as I wanted to defend us, to say we were giving everything we had, I couldn't blame them. Their children were dying. And from where they stood, we weren't stopping it. I still remember one night vividly. We had just found the body of a boy named Aaron. He was 9 years old. His mother collapsed on the ground when we told her. She screamed so loud it felt like the whole block shook. And I just stood there, useless, wishing the earth would swallow me up because I couldn't give her what she needed most, her son back. That night, I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway, unable to go inside. My wife opened the front door, stood on the porch with worry etched across her face, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, tears streaming down my cheeks. A police officer isn't supposed to break, but I was breaking. Inside the department, tempers flared. Detectives argued over theories, over suspects, over evidence. Some believed we were chasing one man. Others thought it had to be a group. We debated the details until our throats were raw, but nothing brought us closer to stopping the killings. The FBI got involved, lending manpower, resources, expertise. We welcomed the help, but it also felt like a reminder that we weren't enough. Our city needed outsiders to come in and clean up what we couldn't handle. That stung more than I'll ever admit. Leads trickled in constantly. One tip said a suspicious green car was seen near a crime scene. Another said a man was luring kids with promises of jobs or candy. Each lead had just enough weight to chase, but never enough to close the case. The killer was careful, deliberate. He left almost nothing behind. But then, fibers. That was the first real thread we could pull. Some of the victims' clothing carried strange fibers, green carpet, dog hair, unusual threads. Forensic science was still developing then, but it gave us a glimmer of hope. Whoever was doing this might have a signature, something he couldn't hide. Meanwhile, the funerals didn't stop. Week after week, we buried more children. I went to as many as I could, though I knew my presence brought little comfort. Parents looked at me with hollow eyes, as if to say, "You're too late." They weren't wrong. By the summer of 1980, the count was unbearable. 20 children gone. 20, and still no suspect in handcuffs. I found myself questioning everything. Was I missing something obvious? Was I in the wrong job? Could anyone really protect this city? I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying each crime scene, each clue, each interview. My wife would reach for my hand, try to anchor me, but I was adrift in a sea of death and guilt. And yet, even in the darkest moments,
there were flashes of determination. My fellow officers, exhausted as they were, kept pushing. Volunteers from the community organized patrols, watching over kids, walking them home from school. Preachers opened their churches as safe spaces. Parents formed groups, calling themselves Parents Against the Murderers. The city was wounded, yes, but it was fighting back. And as for me, I made myself a promise. I didn't care what it took, how many nights I lost, how many years of my life I gave away. I would not rest until we found the monster behind this. What I didn't know then was how close we were and how complicated the truth would turn out to be.
By early 1981, Atlanta was a city on edge. Parents wouldn't let their kids walk to school anymore. You'd see streets that once echoed with the sound of children playing turn silent, eerily quiet. Every shadow felt threatening, every stranger suspicious. And for us in law enforcement, the pressure was reaching a breaking point. The mayor was breathing down our necks, the governor was demanding results, and the public, well, they were done waiting. People were angry, and in a way, I couldn't blame them. We had bodies, we had families destroyed, but still no face to pin this nightmare on. That's when we shifted strategies. We realized the killer had a pattern, even if it wasn't obvious at first glance. Many of the victims were last seen near certain bridges or waterways. The Chattahoochee River kept coming up, again and again. Whoever this monster was, he was using those rivers like a dumping ground. So we set up surveillance. Night after night, we positioned officers near bridges, in unmarked cars, crouched in the dark with binoculars. It was grueling work. Hours of silence, broken only by the hum of insects or the occasional splash of water. But deep down, we all believed, sooner or later, the killer would return. And then, one night in May 1981, it happened. I wasn't on the stakeout that night, but I'll never forget the call that came in around 3 a.m. Two officers reported hearing a splash under the James Jackson Parkway Bridge. Moments later, they stopped the car trying to cross the bridge, a 1970 Chevrolet station wagon. Behind the wheel was a young man named Wayne Williams. Williams was 23 years old, a freelance photographer, sometimes a music promoter. He lived with his parents. On the surface, he didn't look like the monster we'd been chasing. He was polite, cooperative, even tried to explain himself. Said he was out looking for a girl he was supposed to audition for his talent show. At 3 a.m, on a bridge known for being a body dump? Suspicious? You bet it was. But here's the thing. We didn't have enough to arrest him right then. No body, no hard evidence, just suspicion. Still, we took his details, his car, his story, and something about him stuck. Over the next few days, the river gave up its secrets. Not far from where Williams had been stopped, the body of a young man named Nathaniel Cater surfaced. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Williams became our prime suspect. The investigation around him exploded. Detectives tailed him everywhere he went. We dug into his past, his habits, his home. And what we found was unsettling. Fibers, those strange green carpet fibers we'd been finding on victims' clothing, they matched the carpet inside Williams' house. Dog hairs, they matched his family's German Shepherd. It was like a puzzle, finally snapping into place.
I remember the tension in the squad room. Some of us felt relief, like maybe we were finally at the end of this nightmare. Others were cautious, warning that fibers and hairs weren't the same as catching him in the act. We'd seen cases fall apart before, and nobody wanted that to happen now. Meanwhile, the community was split. Some believed we had our man. Others thought Williams was just a scapegoat, that the real killer was still out there. Conspiracy theories ran wild. Some said the murders were racially motivated attacks by groups we weren't willing to investigate. Others swore it was a cover-up by the government. In the middle of all that noise, we had to stay focused. Williams didn't make it easy either. He talked to the press, calmly, confidently, almost taunting us. He insisted he had nothing to do with the murders, that he was being harassed. Watching him on TV made my blood boil. I'd seen the devastation left behind, the tears of mothers and fathers. And here was this man standing there with a smug smile, denying everything. But we couldn't rush it. If we were going to take him down, we needed the case airtight. I'll never forget the night we finally brought him in, June 1981. After weeks of surveillance, of combing through evidence, we arrested Wayne Williams for the murder of Nathaniel Cater. The weight in the room when the cuffs clicked shut, it was heavy, electric. Some of us felt triumph, others felt dread, because deep down, we all knew an arrest wasn't the same as justice. Now came the trial, the scrutiny, the possibility that everything we'd worked for could collapse. For me, personally, it was a strange mix. Relief that maybe, just maybe, the killing would stop, but also doubt. Could this one man really be responsible for so many deaths? Could we prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt? And if not, oh, God help us all. Because Atlanta couldn't take another failure.
Wayne Williams' arrest shook Atlanta to its core. Some people sighed in relief, finally believing the nightmare was over. Others clenched their fists, convinced the police had grabbed the wrong man. Me? I was caught somewhere in between, desperate to believe we had the right suspect, but haunted by the possibility we didn't. The trial was set for early 1982, and when it began, the entire nation turned its eyes on us. Courtrooms are usually quiet, controlled places, but this one felt more like an arena. Every day, reporters packed the benches, their notebooks ready, cameras waiting outside. Families of victims came too, filling the room with grief, anger, and hope. The air was heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on fibers, those green carpet strands, the unusual dog hairs, threads from Williams' environment. They'd been found on multiple victims. Experts testified about how rare those fibers were, how unlikely it was for them to appear by coincidence. Piece by piece, they painted a picture that Williams' home, his car, his world had touched the children who were now gone. And then there were the witnesses, people who claimed Williams had approached kids with promises of work, or that they'd seen him in suspicious places at odd hours. None of it was a smoking gun, but stacked together, it created weight, a heavy, suffocating weight.
The defense, of course, fought back. They argued the fibers could have been transferred innocently, that the police had tunnel vision, that Wayne Williams was being railroaded because the city needed someone, anyone, to blame. They pointed to inconsistencies in witness testimony, to the lack of direct evidence tying Williams to many of the victims. I sat through much of that trial, listening, watching. Williams himself was calm, almost too calm. He'd sit there with that same steady expression, sometimes scribbling notes, sometimes looking straight at the jury. Not once did I see him crack. Not once did I see guilt etched across his face. That disturbed me more than anything. A guilty man should sweat. But Williams, he looked like he was playing a game he thought he could win.
The most powerful moment, though, wasn't from the lawyers or the experts. It was from the parents. When mothers and fathers took the stand, describing their children, who they were, what they loved, how they vanished, the courtroom went silent. Juries aren't supposed to decide cases on emotion alone, but no one could ignore the raw pain spilling from those families. As the weeks dragged on, the city outside the courthouse split deeper. Protesters shouted that Williams was innocent, that the murders were part of a larger conspiracy. Others carried signs demanding justice, certain Williams was the killer. Rumors spread like wildfire of Ku Klux Klan involvement, of cover-ups, of secret deals. Atlanta was a powder keg, and the trial was the match.
Inside the department, we were divided too. Some detectives swore Williams was the guy. Others whispered doubts in the hallways, wondering if maybe we'd been too quick to close the book. After all, Williams was only formally charged with 2 murders, Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. 2 men, not the dozens of children whose faces haunted our bulletin boards. The prosecution argued the patterns tied everything together, but tying and proving, those were 2 different things. When the jury finally went into deliberation, the wait was excruciating. Hours ticked by, then a day, and another. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the phone, every ring making my heart jump. And then it came, the verdict. Guilty. Wayne Williams was convicted of the murders of Cater and Payne. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms. The courtroom erupted. Some cried tears of relief, others shouted in anger. Williams himself stood tall, shaking his head, insisting he was innocent. To this day, he's never admitted guilt.
For Atlanta, the verdict was both an ending and a beginning. The child murders officially stopped. No more bodies appeared in rivers or vacant lots. For many, that was proof enough that we had our man. But for others, doubt lingered. Had justice really been served? Or had we closed the case because the city couldn't handle the chaos any longer? As an officer who lived through it, I can tell you this. The trial didn't heal the city, not immediately. Too much blood had been spilled, too many families shattered. But it gave people something they desperately needed, the belief that the nightmare was over. And me? I carried conflicting truths in my heart. I wanted to believe Wayne Williams was guilty. That would mean we had fought, suffered, and finally won. But the whispers of uncertainty never left me. They still haven't. Because in law enforcement, you learn one brutal lesson. Justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's messy, imperfect, and wrapped in doubt. And Atlanta, in those years, was the messiest case.
After the verdict was read, and Wayne Williams was sent away to serve life behind bars, Atlanta tried to breathe again. But the thing about a city scarred that deeply, it doesn't just bounce back. The wounds linger, the shadows remain. And for me, those shadows have followed me my entire life. The killings stopped after Williams' arrest, yes. No more children vanished in the same terrifying pattern. That fact alone became the cornerstone of the argument that we'd caught the right man. People said, "Look, it's over. The nightmare ended the moment he went to prison." And maybe that's true. Maybe. But the human cost? That never ended. I think about the parents most of all. The mothers who cried until their voices broke. The fathers who stood stone-faced, trying to be strong but crumbling inside. I'd see them at press conferences, at funerals, at the courthouse, and then years later I'd see them again at memorial services,
still holding on to photographs of their babies, still asking questions no one could answer. Questions like, why my child? Why him? Why her? Or the hardest one of all, are you sure you got the right man? And I could never look them in the eye and give them certainty. Not 100%. Because the truth is, Wayne Williams was only convicted of 2 murders. 2. The prosecution tied him to many more through fibers and circumstantial evidence, but in the eyes of the law, the rest of those children never got their day in court. Their cases remain technically unsolved. That fact has haunted me for decades. Atlanta moved on, at least on the surface. The city grew, businesses thrived, neighborhoods changed, but underneath, the memory of those years clings like a scar. Some folks never stop doubting. Theories still swirl about the Ku Klux Klan, about government conspiracies, about multiple killers working at once. I've read them all, heard them shouted at community meetings, whispered in back alleys. And though I can't say I believe most of them, I understand why people search for answers. When you lose a child in such a horrific way, you'll dig through every possibility to make sense of the senseless. As for me, I've replayed every detail in my mind 1,000 times. The maps with their red pins, the stakeouts under the bridges, the mother's screams, the fibers under the microscope, the jury's verdict. And still, at night, when the house is quiet, doubt creeps in. Did we stop the right man? Did we do everything we could? Could we have saved more lives if we'd moved faster, thought sharper, pushed harder? That's the kind of guilt that never fades. It settles deep in your bones.
People sometimes ask me why I still talk about this case after so many years. Why reopen old wounds when the city would rather remember itself as the city too busy to hate, not the city where dozens of children died? And my answer is simple, because forgetting would be the final injustice. Those kids, Yusuf, Milton, Latanya, Aaron, and so many others, they deserve to be remembered, not as statistics, not as unsolved files in a cabinet, but as children whose lives mattered. Every time I tell this story, I say their names in my heart. It's the least I can do. Wayne Williams, now an old man behind bars, still insists he's innocent. He's fought for parole, fought to clear his name. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder, what if he's telling the truth? What if the real killer slipped through our fingers? It's a thought I hate, but it's a thought I can't silence. Because when you've seen as much as I have, you learn to live with uncertainty. But here's what I do know, what I cling to when the doubt threatens to consume me. We tried. God help us, we tried. We poured every ounce of ourselves into that case. Days without sleep, marriages strained, health ruined. We carried the weight of an entire city on our shoulders, and though we may have stumbled, we never stopped fighting. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Evil exists. It hides in plain sight, sometimes behind polite smiles and everyday routines. But so does resilience. I saw it in the parents who buried their children, yet still stood up to demand justice. I saw it in neighbors walking kids home in groups, refusing to give fear the final word. I saw it in my fellow officers, battered and broken, but still reporting for duty every damn day. 40 years have passed since those dark days, and still Atlanta remembers. At memorials, at candlelight vigils, in documentaries and books, the story is told again and again, and every time the same message rings out: never again.
So when I close my eyes and think back, I don't just see the horror, I see the fight. I see a city wounded but unbroken. And I remind myself that telling this story, my story, their story, is how we honor the children we lost. Because in the end, justice may be imperfect, the truth may be blurry, but memory is what keeps them alive. And as long as I have breath in my body, I'll keep remembering. I'll keep telling you about the Atlanta child murders, about the children who never came home, about the nightmare that gripped the city, and the questions that still haunt us. This isn't just history, it's a warning. Evil walks among us, but so does courage, so does love, so does the determination to never let the darkness win. That's the story I carry. That's the story I'll leave you with.
People like clean endings. They want stories to wrap up neatly, villains unmasked, justice served, and life moving on. But real life isn't like that. Not in Atlanta, not in the early 80s, and certainly not in the case of the murdered children. Even after Wayne Williams was convicted, whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got louder. Folks started saying he only got 2 murders pinned on him. What about the rest? And they were right to ask. More than 20 children were dead, and the court only officially tied Williams to 2 adults. That left a hole wide enough to drive a truck through. Inside the department, we wrestled with the same questions. Some of my colleagues were convinced Williams was guilty of it all. Others weren't so sure. And then there were the rumors that kept circling. Rumors too heavy to ignore. One of the loudest theories pointed straight at the Ku Klux Klan. Atlanta, like much of the South, still carried deep racial scars. People remembered the bombings, the cross-burnings, the violence. So when black children started dying, many in the community were quick to suspect the Klan. And honestly, we had to take that seriously. The FBI opened files on known Klan members. They ran surveillance, tapped phones, listened for anything that might connect them to the murders. And there were moments, I'll admit, when the evidence looked troubling. One file I remember suggested that a Klan member bragged about wanting to start a race war by killing black children. That's the kind of statement you can't just ignore. But the hard evidence, the kind that holds up in court, never came together. The fibers didn't point to the Klan. The timelines didn't match up cleanly. And so the official investigation circled back to Wayne Williams. Still, I'll tell you this. Just because we couldn't prove something doesn't mean people stop believing it. To this day, I'll meet folks who swear the Klan was involved, that Williams was just a convenient fall guy. I don't argue with them. I just listen, because I understand where that pain and mistrust comes from. And then there were other suspects, men who fit the profile, loners, drifters, men with troubling histories. We investigated dozens of them. Some had alibis, some didn't, but none ever tied together the way Williams did. That doesn't mean they were innocent of everything. In fact, part of me wonders if some of the early murders could have been committed by someone else entirely, with Williams stepping in later. That's an ugly thought, but in a case this chaotic, nothing can be ruled out. The FBI analysts offered another theory. They suggested that the murders weren't the work of one man, but several. That the panic itself inspired copycats, predators who saw an opportunity in the chaos. Think about it. A city paralyzed with fear, children walking in groups but still vulnerable, parents exhausted and distracted. In that storm, more than one monster could have found cover. I didn't want to believe it, but when I look back, I can't dismiss it. Some of the killings didn't fit the same pattern. Different methods, different victim types. If it was one man, he was either changing his behavior dramatically, or we were chasing ghosts we couldn't see. Conspiracy theories piled up in other corners, too. Some folks whispered about government experiments, secret cover-ups, even human trafficking rings.
As an officer trained in facts and evidence, I wanted to shut those ideas down. But grief makes people reach for answers, any answers, when the truth feels incomplete. I'll be honest, working those cases and then living with the aftermath shook my faith, not just in the system, but in the idea that good always wins. I'd always believed in justice, in the power of hard work and truth. But after those years, I saw how messy justice could be, how the truth could be bent, questioned, even lost. The FBI closed their files, the courts gave their verdict, but the community, they never closed the book, not fully. And I can't say I blame them. Even now, decades later, journalists dig up new leads, podcasters re-examine the evidence, families beg for cases to be reopened. DNA technology has advanced, and sometimes samples are retested. Occasionally, a new clue emerges, but so far, no revelation has been big enough to change the official story. Wayne Williams remains the man history points to. But history, like memory, is complicated. For me, the farthest part was watching trust dissolve. Trust between the police and the people we served. Some thought we didn't care because the victims were poor and black. Others thought we rushed to close the case for political reasons. And even when we did our best, even when we poured our hearts and souls into it, suspicion lingered. That, more than anything, broke me. Because without trust, a city can't heal. So when people ask if the Atlanta child murders ended with Williams, I say this: legally, yes. Officially, yes. But in the hearts of the people, no. The story is still unfolding, still debated, still raw. And maybe that's the truest reflection of what happened. Because how do you close the book on dozens of murdered children? How do you stamp case closed on grief that deep? The answer is simple. You don't.
I carried the Atlanta child murders with me long after I hung up my badge. Retirement was supposed to bring peace. Fishing trips, quiet mornings with coffee, time with my wife and grandkids. And yes, I got all of that. But in the quiet, in those still hours when the world slows down, the ghosts come back. People think retirement means escape. But when you've lived through something like Atlanta in 1979 to 81, you never really escape. Those faces follow you. Those little names etched in police files, they don't stay in the past. They knock on your door at night. They sit in the empty chair across from you. They stare back from the shadows when you're alone. I've often asked myself, did I do enough? I wore the uniform. I walked the neighborhoods. I held grieving mothers in my arms. I fought for leads, chased rumors, stayed awake until my body shut down. But when I count the children, 28, maybe more, I can't shake the feeling that no matter what we did, it wasn't enough, because nothing could ever bring them back. After I retired, I tried to live an ordinary life. But every so often, I'd get calls from journalists, authors, even college students writing papers. Tell me about the case, they'd ask. And every time, my chest would tighten, because talking about it meant reliving it. Yet I never said no, because silence felt like betrayal. Sometimes my grandkids would climb into my lap, laughing, asking me about the old days as a cop. I'd smile, tell them funny stories, the harmless ones, chasing a lost dog, directing traffic during a parade. But I never told them about the bodies, about the rivers, about the mothers screaming in the night. I kept that part locked away. Maybe one day they'll read about it in a book or see it in a documentary, and then they'll ask me. And maybe then I'll find the courage to tell them. Faith helped me more than I can admit. I sat in church pews, hands clasped, asking God the same questions the parents asked me. Why? Why these children? Why this city? I never got a clear answer, but sometimes in prayer, I felt a strange comfort, as if those children weren't lost forever, as if they were somewhere safe beyond our broken world.
I like to believe that. It's the only way I can keep from drowning in the darkness of it all. Atlanta today is a different city. Skyscrapers touch the sky, businesses thrive, music and culture flow from every street corner. Tourists pass through with smiles, never knowing that just beneath the surface, the soil carries memories of children who never got to grow up. Sometimes I walk those streets quietly, remembering. A park here where a boy once played, a corner store there where a girl was last seen. Landmarks of a tragedy invisible to most, but burned into my heart. Every anniversary, when the community holds memorials, I try to attend. I stand among parents, now older, their hair grayed, their bodies slowed by time. Some still clutch photographs, creased, faded, but precious. They look at me, and in their eyes, I see both gratitude and accusation. Gratitude that we tried, accusation that we failed. Both are true. I once spoke at one of those memorials. I didn't prepare a speech. I just stood before them, my voice trembling, and I said, I can't give you answers I don't have. I can't give you justice that feels whole. But I can give you this. I will remember. I will carry your children with me for the rest of my life. And that's all I've ever had to give. Memory. Wayne Williams still sits in prison, still claiming he's innocent. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. The court's decided, but history will keep debating. For me, the verdict matters less than the children themselves. Their lives, their laughter, their potential. Stolen. That's the real story. Not the man in the courtroom, not the conspiracy theories. The children. Always the children. If there's one lesson I've carried from those years, it's this. Evil hides where you least expect it. It doesn't always wear a mask or a monster's face. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it lives next door. And the only way to fight it is with vigilance, with community, with love that refuses to be broken.
I tell this story not because I enjoy reliving it, God knows I don't, but because forgetting would be the final crime. Those children deserved more than silence. They deserved to be remembered, not as victims, but as sons and daughters, as dreamers who never got the chance to grow. When my time comes, when I lay down for the last time, I hope I meet them. I hope I see their faces, not cold and lifeless as I once did, but bright and smiling, running free. Maybe then I'll know peace. Until that day, I'll keep telling you what happened in Atlanta. I'll keep carrying the weight. Because if my voice can keep their memory alive even for just a little longer, then maybe, in some small way, justice still lives.